Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Rajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Gopi Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Gopi Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Utale Shri Mate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Janadapi Sunichena Taradivasa Hishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Hare Nama Vikibalam Kalo Nastyeva Gatir Anyata Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All glories to the devotees of Austin. May Krishna bless you, protect you, and maintain you. So, since Suvarna Mataji sponsored me this program, I asked her what I should speak. And she said, oh, please tell the story of Krishna punishing Kaliya. So I always do whatever my host requests. So I dedicate this narration to Suvarna and her family and to all the devotees of Austin. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. King Parikshit inquired, why did Kaliya leave Ramanaka Island, the abode of the serpents? And why did Garuda become so antagonistic toward Kaliya alone? Shukadeva Goswami said, in order to avoid being eaten by Garuda, The serpents had previously made an arrangement with Garuda, whereby they would each make a monthly offering of tribute at the base of a tree. Thus, every month on schedule, each serpent would duly make his offering to that powerful carrier of Vishnu as a purchase of protection. And although all the other serpents were dutifully making offerings to Garuda, there was one serpent, the arrogant Kaliya, the son of Kadru, who would eat all these offerings before Garuda could claim them. Thus Kaliya directly defied the carrier of Lord Vishnu. The greatly powerful Garuda, who is very dear to the Supreme Lord, thus became angry when he heard of this. Desiring to kill Kaliya, Garuda rushed towards the serpent with tremendous speed. As Garuda swiftly fell upon him, Kaliya, who had the weapon of poison, raised his numerous heads to counterattack. Showing his ferocious tongues and expanding his horrible eyes, Kaliya then bit Garuda with the weapons of his fangs. The angry son of Taksha moved with overwhelming speed in repelling Kaliya's attack. That terribly powerful carrier of Lord Madhusudana struck Kaliya with his left wing, which shone like gold. Being beaten by Garuda's wing, Kaliya was extremely distraught, and thus he took shelter of a lake adjoining the river Yamuna. Garuda could not enter this lake. Indeed, he could not even approach it. For in that very lake, Garuda had once desired to eat a fish, fish being, after all, his normal food. Although forbidden by the great sage Saubhari, who was meditating there within the water, Garuda took courage and, feeling hungry, seized the fish. Seeing how the unfortunate fish in that lake had become most unhappy at the death of their leader, Subhari uttered the following curse under the impression that Subhari was mercifully acting for the benefit of the lake's residents. If Garuda ever again enters this lake and eats any fish, Garuda will then immediately lose his life. Hear me now, for what I am saying is the truth. Of all the serpents, only Kaliya came to know of this affair, and in fear of Garuda, Kaliya took up residence in that Yamuna lake. But later, Lord Krishna drove him out. Shukadeva Goswami then said, within the river Kalindi was a lake inhabited by the serpent Kaliya, whose fiery poison constantly heated and boiled its waters. Indeed, the vapors thus created were so poisonous that even birds flying over the contaminated lake would fall down into it dead. The wind blowing over that deadly lake carried droplets of water to the shore. Simply by coming into contact with that poisonous breeze, all vegetation and creatures on the shore died. Lord Krishna saw how the Kaliya serpent had polluted the Yamuna river with his terribly powerful poison. But since Krishna had descended from the spiritual world, specifically to subdue envious demons, Krishna immediately climbed to the top of a very high Kadamba tree and prepared himself for battle. Krishna tightened his belt, slapped his arms, and then jumped into the poisonous water. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead landed in the Serpent's Lake, all the snakes there became extremely agitated and began breathing heavily, further polluting it with volumes of poison. The force of Krishna's entrance into the lake caused it to overflow on all sides, and poisonous, fearsome waves flooded the surrounding land up to a distance of 100 bow lengths. But this is not at all amazing, for the Supreme Lord, however, possesses infinite strength. Therefore, one of his names is Ananta. Krishna began sporting in Kaliya's lake like a lordly elephant, swirling his mighty arms and making the water resound in various ways. When Kaliya heard these sounds, Kaliya understood that someone was trespassing in his lake. The serpent could not tolerate this, and he immediately came forward. Indeed, Kaliya saw that Krishna, who was wearing yellow silken garments, was very delicate. Krishna's attractive body shined like a glowing white cloud, his chest bearing the mark of Sri Vatsa, the goddess of fortune. Krishna's face smiling beautifully, and his lotus feet resembling the world of a lotus flower. Krishna was playing fearlessly in the water. But despite Krishna's wonderful appearance, the envious Kaliya furiously bit Krishna on his chest and then completely enwrapped Krishna within his coils. When the members of the cowherder community, who had accepted Krishna as their dearmost friend, saw that Krishna was enveloped in Kaliya's coils and that Krishna was motionless, they were greatly disturbed. They had offered Krishna everything, their very lives, their families, their wealth, wives, and all pleasures. At the sight of Krishna in the clutches of the Kaliya snake, their intelligence became deranged with grief, lamentation, and fear. They all thus fell to the ground. The cows, the bulls, and the female calves, in great distress, called out piteously to Krishna. Fixing their eyes upon him, they stood still in fear, as if ready to cry, but too shocked to shed tears. Then, in the Vrindavan area, there arose all the three types of fearful omens: those on earth, those in the sky, and those in the bodies of living creatures. All of this announced imminent danger. Seeing the inauspicious omens, Nanda Maharaj and the other cowherder men were very fearful, for they knew that on that day Krishna had gone to herd the cows without his elder brother Balaram. And because they had dedicated their minds to Krishna, accepting him as their very life, they were unaware of Krishna's great power and opulence. Thus they concluded that the inauspicious omens indicated Krishna had met with death, and they were overwhelmed with grief, lamentation, and fear. All the inhabitants of Vrindavan, including the children, the women, and the elderly persons, thought of Krishna just as a cow thinks of her helpless young calf. And thus these poor suffering people rushed out of the village, intent upon finding Krishna. However, the Supreme Lord Balaram, master of all transcendental knowledge, smiled and said nothing when he saw the residents of Vrindavan in such distress, because Balaram could understand the extraordinary power of his younger brother. The residents of Vrindavan hurried towards the banks of the Yamuna in search of their dearmost Krishna, following the path marked by his footprints, which bore the signs, the unique signs of the personality of Godhead. The footprints of Lord Krishna, the master of the entire cowherder community, were marked with the lotus flower, barley corn, elephant gold, thunderbolt, and flag. And seeing Krishna's footprints on the path, among the cows' hoofprints, the residents of Vrindavan rushed along in great haste. As they hurried along the path to the bank of the Yamuna River, they saw from a distance that Krishna was in the lake, motionless within the coils of the black serpent. And they further saw that the cowherder boys had all fallen unconscious, and the animals were standing on all sides, crying out for Krishna. Seeing all of this, the residents of Vrindavan were overwhelmed with anguish and confusion. And when the young gopis, whose minds were constantly attached to Krishna, who is the unlimited Supreme Lord, when the young gopis saw that Krishna was now within the grips of the serpent, they remembered Krishna's loving friendship, Krishna's smiling glances, and Krishna's talks with them. Burning with great sorrow, the gopis saw the entire universe as void. Although the elder gopis were feeling just as much distress as Yashoda Devi, and were pouring forth a flood of sorrowful tears, they had to forcibly hold back Krishna's mother, whose consciousness was totally absorbed in her son, Krishna. Standing like corpses, with their eyes fixed upon Krishna's lotus face, these gopis each took turns recounting the various pastimes of the darling of Vraja. However, Lord Balaram then saw that Nanda Maharaj and the other cowherder men, who had dedicated their very lives to Krishna, were now beginning to enter the serpent's lake. The Supreme Personality of Godhead Balaram fully knew Lord Krishna's actual power, and therefore Balaram restrained them. For 2 hours, Krishna remained within the coils of the serpent, imitating the behavior of an ordinary mortal. But when Krishna understood that the women, children, and other residents of his village of Gokul were in acute distress because of their love for him, who was their only shelter and goal in life, Krishna immediately rose up from the bonds of the Kaliya serpent. His coils tormented by the expanding body of Krishna, Kaliya released him. In great anger, the serpent then raised his hoods high, standing still, breathing heavily. Kaliya's nostrils appeared like vessels for cooking poison, and his staring eyes in his face looked like firebrands. Thus the serpent Kaliya looked at Krishna. Again and again, Kaliya licked his lips with bifurcated tongues as Kaliya stared at Krishna with a glance full of terrible poisonous fire. But Krishna playfully circled around Kaliya, just as Garuda would play with a snake. And in response, Kaliya also moved about, looking for an opportunity to bite Krishna. Having severely depleted the serpent's strength with his relentless circling, Sri Krishna, the origin of everything, pushed down Kaliya's raised shoulders and mounted his broad serpentine heads. Thus, Lord Sri Krishna, the original master of all fine arts, began to dance with his lotus feet, deeply reddened by the touch of the numerous jewels on the serpents' heads. Seeing the Lord dancing, his servants in the heavenly planets, the Gandharvas, the Siddhas, sages, Charanas, and the wise of the demigods, immediately arrived on the scene. With great pleasure, they began accompanying Krishna's dancing by playing drums, such as mridangas, panavas, and anakas. They also made offerings of songs, flowers, and prayers. Kaliya had many prominent heads, and when one of them would not bow down, Lord Sri Krishna, who inflicts punishment on cruel wrongdoers, would smash that stubborn head, striking it with his lotus feet. Then, as Kaliya entered his death throes, Krishna began wheeling his heads around and vomiting ghastly blood from his mouth and nostrils. The serpent thus experienced extreme pain and misery. Exuding poisonous waste from his eyes, Kaliya would occasionally dare to raise up one of his heads, which would breathe heavily with anger. Then Krishna would dance upon it and subdue it, forcing it to bow down with his feet. The demigods took each of these exhibitions as an opportunity to worship Krishna. Krishna, the primeval personality of Godhead. And so they worshipped Krishna with showers of flowers. Lord Krishna's wonderful, powerful dancing trampled and broke all of Kaliya's 1,000 hoods. Then the serpent, profusely vomiting blood from his mouth, finally recognized Sri Krishna to be the eternal personality of Godhead, the supreme master of all moving and non-moving beings. He recognized Krishna as Lord Narayana. And thus, at least within his mind, Kaliya took shelter of Krishna. And when Kaliya's wives saw how their husband had become so fatigued from the excessive weight of Lord Krishna, Krishna, who carries the entire universe in his abdomen, and how Krishna's umbrella-like hoods, how Kaliya's umbrella-like hoods had been shattered by the striking of Krishna's heels, they felt great distress. And with their clothing, ornaments, and hair scattered in disarray, they then approached the eternal personality of Godhead, Krishna. Their minds very much disturbed, those saintly ladies placed their children before them and bowed down to Krishna, laying their bodies flat on the ground. They desired the liberation of their sinful husband, and they desired the shelter of the Supreme Lord, who is the giver of ultimate shelter. And thus the Nagapatnis, folding their hands in supplication, approached Krishna and offered prayers. Thus, being praised by the Nagapatnis, the Supreme Personality of Godhead released the serpent Kaliya, who had fallen unconscious, his heads battered by the striking of Krishna's lotus feet. Kaliya slowly regained his vital force and sensory functions. Then, breathing loudly and painfully, the poor serpent addressed Lord Krishna in humble submission. Dear Lord, our very birth as a snake has made us envious, ignorant, and constantly angry. O my Lord, it is so difficult for people to give up their conditioned nature, by which they identify with that which is unreal. O Supreme Creator, it is you who generate this universe, which is composed of the variegated arrangement of the material modes. And in the process, you manifest various kinds of personalities and species, varieties of sensory and physical strength, and varieties of mothers and fathers with variegated mentalities and forms. O Supreme Personality of Godhead, among all the species within your material creation, we serpents are by nature always enraged, being thus deluded by your illusory energy, which is very difficult to give up. How can we possibly give it up on our own? O Lord, since you are the omniscient Lord of the universe, you are the actual cause of freedom from illusion. So please arrange for us whatever you consider proper, whether it be mercy or punishment. Shukadeva Goswami then said, after hearing Kaliya's words, Krishna, who was acting in the role of a human being, thus replied, O serpent, you may not remain here any longer. Now, go back to the ocean immediately, accompanied by your retinue of children, wives, and other relatives and friends. Let this river Yamuna be enjoyed by the cows and human beings. If a mortal being attentively remembers my command to you to leave Vrindavan and go to the ocean, and narrates this account at sunrise and sunset, he or she will never be afraid of you. If one bathes in this place of my pastimes and offers the waters of this lake to the demigods or other worshipable personalities, or if one observes a fast and duly worships and remembers me, one is sure to become free from all sinful reactions. O Kaliya, out of fear of Garuda, you left Ramanaka Island and came to the shelter of this lake. But because you are now marked with my footprints, Garuda will no longer try to eat you. Shukadeva Goswami said, O my dear King Maharaj Parikshit, having thus been released by Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose activities are wonderful, Kaliya joined his wives in worshipping Krishna with great joy and reverence. Kaliya worshipped the Lord of the universe by offering Krishna fine garments, along with necklaces, jewels, and other valuable ornaments, wonderful scents and ointments, and a large garland of lotus flowers. Having thus pleased the Lord, whose flag is marked with the emblem of Garuda, Kaliya felt most satisfied. Receiving Krishna's permission to leave, Kaliya circumambulated Krishna and offered him obeisances. Then, taking his wives, friends, and children, Kaliya went to his island in the sea. The very moment Kaliya left, The Yamuna was immediately restored to her original condition, free from poison, and now full of nectarian water. All of this happened by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who was manifesting a human-like form just to enjoy his pastimes. Then Krishna rose up out of the lake, wearing divine garlands, fragrances, and garments, covered with many fine jewels and decorated with gold. And when the cowherders saw Krishna, they all stood up immediately, just like an unconscious person's senses coming back to life. Filled with great joy, they affectionately embraced Krishna. Having regained their vital functions, Yashoda, Rohini, Nanda, and all the other cowherder women and men then went up to Krishna. Why, even the dried up trees came back to life. Lord Balaram then embraced his infallible brother and laughed, knowing well the extent of Krishna's potency. Out of great feelings of love, Balaram lifted Krishna upon his lap and repeatedly looked at him. The cows, bulls, and young female calves also achieved the highest pleasure. All of the respectable brahmanas, together with their wives, came forward to greet Nanda Maharaj, and they said to him, "Your son was in the grip of Kaliya, but by the grace of God, the grace of providence, your Krishna is now free." The Brahmanas then advised Nanda Maharaj, "In order to assure that your son Krishna will always be free from danger, you should give charity to the Brahmanas." Thus, with a satisfied mind, Nanda Maharaj then very gladly gave them gifts of gold and cows. The greatly fortunate mother Yashoda, having lost her son and then regained him, then placed Krishna on her lap. That chaste lady cried constant torrents of tears as she repeatedly embraced her son Krishna. Because the residents of Vrindavan were feeling very weak out of hunger, thirst, and fatigue, they and the cows spent that night where they were, lying down near the bank of the Kalindi. But during the night, while everyone was sleeping, a great fire blazed up within the dry summer forest. The fire surrounded the inhabitants of Vraja on all sides and began to scorch them. Then the residents of Vrindavan woke up, extremely disturbed by the great fire threatening to burn them. They thus took shelter of Krishna, the Supreme Lord, who by his spiritual potency was appearing like an ordinary human being. They called out, "Krishna, Krishna, O Lord of opulence, O Ram, possessor of unlimited power, this most terrible fire is about to devour us, and we are your devotees. O Lord, we are your true friends and devotees, so please protect us from this insurmountable fire of death. We can never give up your lotus feet, which drive away all fear." Seeing his devotee so disturbed, Sri Krishna, the infinite Lord of the universe and possessor of infinite power, then swallowed the terrible forest fire. Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Hey. Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Hey. Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Rakshama. Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Pahima. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshama. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahima. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshama. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahima. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshama. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahima. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'd like to speak just for a few minutes on some of the pertinent points mentioned in this chapter. So we see, which is so characteristic of the residents of Vrindavan, that whenever there is danger, they immediately take shelter of Krishna. That is the mark of the residents of Vrindavan. They are completely emblems of Bhagavad Gita 1866. Krishna says at the end of Bhagavad Gita, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braja aham tvang sarva papebhyo mokshayashyami ma suchaha. And this line, Mam Ekam, Krishna is telling Arjuna, and in this way telling us, that as devotees, we must take exclusive shelter of Krishna. And that is what these residents of Vrindavan do in any situation. They simply cry out and take shelter of Krishna. As it says here, this most terrible fire is about to devour us. So right now, all of us, all over the world, there is a terrible fire known as coronavirus. So how much we should be also praying, just like these residents of Vrindavan. I'm doing that every day. Praying to Krishna, please, Pahimam, Rakshamam, please protect us. Please maintain. And I'm not just praying for me and my family. I'm praying for the whole world. The whole world is now suffering because of this. I don't call it coronavirus. I call it Vasudev virus because it is all pervading. No one has escaped. So that's one thing. These residents of Vrindavan, as soon as there's the slightest fear, they take shelter of Krishna. Now, whenever I read this chapter, and I've read this chapter so many times because Krishna book and Krishna Leela is my personal favorite. It was because of Krishna book that I became a devotee. I read 5 chapters of Krishna book, and after reading how Krishna killed Putana, I closed the book and said, I'm joining Prabhupada and his movement. That was back in 1973. And over the years, people have invited me, Prabhuji, come to India, stay with us. And I go, yes, but there's no need for me to go to India. Because all I have to do is open Krishna book wherever I am. I'm in Vrindavan. I'm reading today this story, and although I read it so many times, still it's fresh. Still it's exciting. Still it has so much juice to it. I'm glad Suvarna picked this chapter. So nice. So I very much can identify, me personally. Unlike you, I was born in the Malecha Yavana family. So I'm like Kaliya when he says, our very birth as a snake has made us envious, ignorant, and constantly angry. That's me. Before becoming a devotee, that was definitely me. Envious. I'm still ignorant and not so much angry. But I see Kaliya in me before becoming a devotee. It is so difficult for people to give up their conditioned nature. Yes. One reason that since 1994, I have been mostly preaching to Indian Hindu families is because unlike me, you easily, naturally take to Krishna. I just have to, just a little scratch, boom, you guys take off like anything. I just have to speak a little bit about Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya, and your devotional lives just explode, just like that. But for people like me, such hard work to overcome the conditioned nature, which is why Prabhupada stressed so much to his disciples. Very strictly must follow the regulative principles, must strictly adhere to all the rules and regulations. And how he insisted, must chant Mahamantra every day, must worship the deity, must follow Ekadasi, because this is how we will overcome the conditioned nature. So it's a struggle, it's hard, because that conditioning has been there for millions and millions of lifetimes. But there is one secret weapon, the Mahamantra. The Mahamantra and Lord Chaitanya and Prabhupada's mercy is so special that even with strong, heavy, conditioned nature, there is hope. There is glimmer, there's light at the end of the tunnel. But I must adhere to this, as Lord Chaitanya says, hearing and chanting. Hearing, this is the basis. I always emphasize this whenever I do kathas. I emphasize this. Everything comes from nicely hearing and chanting. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. As Kaliya says here, we serpents are by nature always enraged, and being thus deluded by your illusory energy, which is very difficult to give up. Yes, same thing Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita chapter 7, verse 14. Very important verse of Gita. Daivi hiesha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mameva ye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. Very, very difficult to conquer over the stringent laws of material nature. It's sometimes, Prabhupada will say, insurmountable. Or there is that bhajan, my favorite bhajan. Let's see. Mayam, what is that line? Bhajahure mana Srinanda Nandana Abhaya Charanada Bindare Dulava Manava Janama Satsanga. Here it is. Taraha e bhava sindhure in Bengali. Taraha is the same as the line in Bhagavad Gita, Taranti, crossover. In the song, Bhava Sindhu, this insurmountable material energy is like an ocean. Who can swim from Los Angeles to Hawaii? Impossible. Impossible to swim. That is the material energy. Insurmountable. But Krishna says, here's the thing. If you surrender to me, you can easily cross. So yes, Kaliya is saying ordinarily, how can we possibly give it up on our own? But Lord Chaitanya has given us the easiest process. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kivalam, Karo nastyeva nastyeva, nastyeva gatir anyata. Another thing I always preach in every class is this shloka. Hare Nama eva kivalam. Right now, these last couple of days, I'm preaching to one American gentleman. He's in his late 60s. And he has spent most of his life, along with his wife, they have been into astrology, doing whatever the astrology says. But recently he has discovered Prabhupada's books, and he has been writing me now every day. And he's telling me, Prabhupada is a genius. How Prabhupada has written these books is amazing. So he's writing me. He has accepted me as his Shiksha Guru. And so he's asking me, can I give up astrology? I said, yes, give it up. And then just this morning he wrote me, can I give up my pranayama and this and that? I said, yes. You just chant Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Bas, finish. Just chant Hare Krishna. And I explained to him that Bhagavad Gita, Mam Ekam, the chief, easiest way to surrender to Krishna is to chant the Maha Mantra. All right. Let's finish up. Practice what I preach. I hope you liked it. I hope I'll be invited again. In fact, I think I'm coming back on Prabhupada's Vyas Puja Day to speak about Prabhupada. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you, devotees of Austin. Thank you, Satyasar. Thank you, Suvarna Mandari. And before I finish, I'd like to give blessings to all the devotees of Austin. I hope my blessings are of some value. May Krishna bless you, protect you, and maintain you. Hare Krishna.